I do like vintage Rolex looks. Combine that with very competitive price and great specs, and before you know it, it is in my shopping basket. However, this Addiesdive had a few surprises up its sleeve. So was it money well spent? Well, we have it here. Let's find out. Hello and thank you for tuning back. Before we jump into this video, don't forget to subscribe and also check out my Instagram page. I post there some additional footage, work-in-progress pictures and some interesting specials that I do come across sometimes. Design. Yes, you heard me right, we are talking about the design. So in regards to it, well, this is where things get, should we say, interesting. Looking straight on, yes, all the hallmarks of vintage Rolex looks. However, as we turn the watch case around, we get almost cushion-like shape, which of course Seiko is famous for. And then we get the twisted lugs, which are very reminiscent of Omega Seamaster lineup. So I think Addiesdive did a pretty good job here, combining various design cues to end up with this quite interesting vintage-inspired timepiece. Price. Before we continue examining the case, let's briefly talk about the price. I did say that the price was very competitive, and yes, indeed, this watch is available at the time of recording this video for just over $60. Taking into account that at the point of introduction Addiesdive priced it at around $120, it is pretty much half a price. And not only Addiesdive dropped the price quite dramatically, they also made some subtle changes and improvements to this watch, mostly in the dial area, and I will of course cover them as we take a closer look at the dial. I will of course leave a link to the product listing in the description of this video. Dimensions. So we have 40mm bezel diameter, the case size measured across is also just under 40mm. Lug-to-lug distance is 46.1mm, which is really good and should make this watch wearable on pretty much most wrist sizes. We do have a stainless steel bracelet version here with protruding end links, and the distance between them is 53mm. We have 20mm lugs and the case height is 14.8mm, out of which nearly 2mm are taken by this double dome sapphire crystal. So this watch should be able to slide under the cuff with not much trouble. The bracelet tapers down to 18mm by the clasp and should cover wrists up to 8 3/4 inch or over 22 cm in circumference, so quite a generous amount of extra links here from Addiesdive. And this watch weighs 167 grams and 150 grams after adjusting it to my about 7-inch wrist. A pretty much Goldilocks weight for a stainless steel desk diver. So another design points here scored by Addiesdive. Case. Looking at the case, as I already covered earlier, the case does have a very interesting vintage-inspired design that draws inspiration from various brands. The case is fully brushed, including the flanks and twisted lugs. The brushing is very fine, almost satin-like, and the transitions between the faces are well machined. In line with vintage aesthetics, there are no crown guards. However, the screw-down crown is slightly sunk into the case side, so there is some protection from crown side knocks. The 7mm signed screw-down crown is well proportioned and easy to operate. Turning the case around and we have a circular brushing on the back of the case and on the screw-on back case. The back case has an engraved Addiesdive logo and specs highlights. Addiesdive declared 200 meters of water resistance on this watch, so we are good even for some recreational diving. Movement. Addiesdive used Seiko NH35 movement to power this watch. I covered this movement in my previous reviews, so here are the highlights. It is an automatic mechanical movement, it hacks and it beats at 21,600 vibrations per hour, and it has about 41 hours of power reserve. Bezel. We have 120 clicks unidirectional bezel with ceramic insert. The bezel grip is finished in a similar style as the rest of the case, however, the bottom part of the bezel is mirror polished, which I think is a very interesting design decision because it breaks the fully brushed case pattern, and from the practical perspective it is really unlikely to get scratched because it is protected by the brushed case and the brushed edge of the bezel. We have engraved minute markers on the bezel. The minute markers are filled with lume, which we will examine shortly. And also, the bezel alignment is pretty much spot on. Another pleasant surprise on this watch is the bezel action. The resistance is good and there is pretty much no backplate to speak of. The sound is nice and ratchety, it is somewhat muted, but still quite tactile and crisp. Here is how it sounds. Crystal. This very interesting double dome sapphire crystal is another design highlight of this watch. It is installed almost flush with the bezel with a tidy bevel on the perimeter. I think the pronounced curvature of the crystal even further accentuates the vintage aesthetics of this watch. There is an anti-reflective coating applied to the crystal, as we can see the slight blue hue on the edges of the reflections. And even though there is an anti-reflective coating, there is still quite a bit of light bounces of this nicely curved sapphire crystal. However, the high polished facets of the gilt handset pretty much always get through that glare, so legibility is still pretty good. Dial. We have all printed dial here. The background has a matte rich black color, which works well with the color of the bezel and is somewhat different to more grayish tone of the dial that Addiesdive used when this watch was initially released. And while the case has Seiko and Omega influence, the dial is of course unmistakably inspired by vintage Rolex. The hour indices are also printed and filled with lume, and we have branding on top of the dial and automatic 200 meters wording above the 6 o'clock marker. We also have date cutout at 3 o'clock position. Now, another improvement on the initial release of this watch is the handset. First, the hands are now much longer and minute, and the second hand are stretching pretty much all the way to the edge of the dial and looking much more elegant. Second, looks like Addiesdive paid extra attention to finishing of the hands. Basically, all the parts that are not filled with lume are high polished and bounce the light really nicely. This new handset transformed this okay-looking dial into a really good-looking one, in my opinion. And the good news doesn't actually stop there. Looking at the lume performance, well, Addiesdive did pretty decent job with lume on this dial and the bezel. Addiesdive used Swiss C3 Retro Superluminova with yellow and green hue. The lume application is very consistent and lume stays legible considerably longer compared to other watches in the same price category. Bracelet. And before we draw a conclusion, let's take a look at this bracelet. Addiesdive has all the bases covered here, so to speak. Solid links, solid end links. The protruding end links do add 2 dimensions on the wrist, so I would of course prefer an inverted end links here. However, even with these links, this watch is pretty much okay on a 6¼ inch wrist, so with the larger wrists it should be okay too. Addiesdive also decided to go with mirror polished centers of the links and mirror polished sides. While I'm okay with sides mirror polished, I'm not 100% convinced with the center links polishing. Polished centers of course do make the bracelet look more premium, however they are also a scratch magnets, so something to keep in mind. The links are connected by pins, which is perfectly okay at this price point, and the tolerances between the links are okay too. Not the tightest I experienced, but still okay for this price point. Moving on to the clasp, well, it is never a strongest point on Addiesdive watches. We have a simple pressed clasp with no branding. On the positive side, the clasp is actually of a good quality. It has 3 well-spaced macro adjustments, and the double pusher locking mechanism has a very good tolerances and functions really well. And in terms of wrist comfort, well, with 150 grams weight and good case design, this watch is very comfortable on the wrist. Verdict. I was seriously surprised by this watch. Okay, the bracelet is not the most refined, but there's always a strap option, which does look pretty good, and with 20mm lugs there are plenty of other aftermarket options, including NATO straps. Other than that, well, it looks like it is possible to find a good quality original designs competitively priced on AliExpress. Okay, maybe still heavily influenced by historical timepieces, but isn't what the vintage-inspired watch should be like anyway. And for around $62 at the time of making this video, it is a very tempting proposition. What are your thoughts? Well, do let us know in the comments. And if you find this review helpful, do hit that like button. Of course, don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more of the same. And as always, thank you for watching, take care, and I will see you in the next video.